In Octopath Traveler, I had picked Alfyn for my first main, so my ranking of his first boss chapter might be a little bit biased, but I think it's still within objectivity. But seeing as Octopath Traveler has to be probably my first RPG aside from like a game like Final Fantasy Tactics, and for Octopath Traveler being the one to sort of break my cherry into RPG, having to face this first boss as my first entry into the game, this boss left a deeply rooted impression onto me, like the first anime that made me cry. Fighting this boss as your first boss by picking your first main has to be studied, because the way this boss feels like it's designed feels like it's purposely designed to be a noob killer. Facing off against this boss gave me such a migraine to deal with that I actually died a few times trying to get through this boss, because it's one of the few bosses that teaches you that you can't brute force your way out of the situation. It feels like the perfect entry into the RPG and into Octopath Traveler, especially if you face off against this boss solo. And the way this boss attack pattern is designed, if you're not a bit experienced or prepared, will throw you in a bit of panic. The way this guy's attack pattern is that once he attacks you with poison, he lays on attack, and once you finally got rid of the poison, he stacks even more poison. So you are never truly alone, because poison will become your best friend. And because of the characteristics of this boss, it doesn't feel like any other character could have faced off against this boss except Alfyn for their first chapter. So that gives it a bit of a specialness, exclusivity to Alfyn alone. So with that being said, I have to give it a ranking of an A. Because of its uniqueness to Alfyn alone in his first chapter, and his attack pattern being a true knowledge check of an RPG, is why I give it this ranking. Going into this boss fight was such a big disappointment for me, because I spent the majority of this chapter pickpocketing people for items, weapons, and armor. You name it, I took it. And then come to find out that the thief has no real use as a thief inside the battle was such a letdown. Because picking up this game, I saw this game as such a revolutionary game, along with its art style, some of the game design choices for the play style. I thought they also had some inspiration from a popular tactics game I enjoyed, like Disgaea, which has mechanics to steal in battle. So coming to find out thief skills in battle is practically useless was such a heartbreaker for me. But I'm probably getting ahead of myself, considering this is the first chapter and those kind of skills are probably locked in the higher levels like the final chapter. But going into this boss still puts a little smile on my face, because of the boss being the anime trope of old men being badasses. So it holds a little space in my weeaboo heart. But aside from that, there's nothing else going on for this fight, aside from the aesthetic, because the fight itself is almost monotonous and there's no real specialness to Therion himself. There's no exclusivity, because you could use this character or boss for any other character. And there was nothing in this boss's attack patterns or kit that made me think, man, I really don't want to get hit by that again. And because of that, I have to give it a D, and only because it's carried by its boss design alone, and probably my bias, and because using Therion at this point in time feels incredibly boring to use. Now Hunter x Hunter has to be my second or third favorite champion to use in Octopath Traveler. I don't know why, but my expectations for the Hunter class was very low. Maybe because it was just after playing Therion and I had no more high expectations, or I felt like this game couldn't surprise me anymore. But boy was I wrong, because going to this boss I screamed. I might have even peed a little, but I don't remember, but I think I would have, because it's just that shocking. And the fact that I was playing this game at night, it raises the atmosphere of this boss monster's design that I didn't think was possible for a pixel art game. And this boss monster design has to be the best one, if not perfect one, out of all, not only for its setting, but it's also its uniqueness to the Hunter class for its first chapter especially. The way this boss monsters look not only vicious, but malicious and seems almost unnatural. That is just disguising itself as a monster that you can tell things have gone wrong in the natural order. And the monster's attack patterns is a perfect match because of the way, not only the way it looks vicious, but also the way it looks unpredictable. You don't know is his next move. One moment it could be a total sandbag, and the next moment it's critting you for more than half your health. So along with the boss monster's uniqueness with its design, attack patterns, and relation, there's also the hunter class being so fun to use because of the hunter's ability to tame animals in battle. So it gives you a bit of variety on what you want to take for your battle depending on which monster you captured. And for that, I have to give the hunter first chapter an S tier rank. And I can't find no fault. Going to Cyrus chapter 1 first battle boss, my mind was heated. My mind wasn't even right because of the first chapter. The way this first chapter was written just made me heated. So I wanted to take my aggression from the entire first chapter onto this boss alone. So you know I was locked in. And once again, we are met with an almost perfect boss that mirrors the champion selected for the story and probably wouldn't fit in any other story except Cyrus's. And considering this boss battle feels like sort of a knowledge check for using Cyrus as a character in this story, it feels appropriate that this boss has to be one of the few bosses that allows you to take your time to do a knowledge check and see what shields or what abilities are most effective to break the shields open to do the maximum amount of damage. And with this boss, and even though he had minions, and even if he was to play Cyrus as solo, Cyrus would still be an effective champion facing off against this boss because of his AoE ability and his sort of knowledge check ability to check whichever the opponent's shields is able to break from his abilities. Which I think is probably one of the positive points to Cyrus, is that he's one of the few champions that can do a big amount of damage in the early parts of the games, starting from the first chapter. The only downside is, for his first chapter, depending on if you go solo or with a team, can determine which shield points are on the boss, which makes it even more kind of annoying to check for, since depending if you go on a team or solo, with a team, most of the shield points will be mainly weapon based, and only weapon that Cyrus has is a staff, which is probably the weakest weapon, and none of his elemental abilities cover any of the boss's shield points except which Cyrus does not have. But even with that minor disadvantage, this is still a great boss battle for his first chapter because of Cyrus being effective counter to this boss battle and the relationship and design of this boss. I have to give it a solid B tier. Coming into this boss battle, it has to be the highest expectation I had this fight, because we just spent the majority of the first chapter glazing the champion called Olberic. Even in his backstory, saying how he took on the entire army and has the strength of 10 men. And you like, damn, this guy is really strong and must be tanky, and this class is warrior. You can't wait to see what this guy can do. And then when we get to the battle just becomes a slugging match between two powerful and manly characters and seeing who can hit harder. But there is no variety in the attacks between the two characters. It's just one hit after the other. And the fact that even if you were playing solo, the boss would still fight with minions and have no differentiate in their attack pattern. So there's really nothing that makes them stand out in their moveset, whether it be from the boss battle or the minions. The boss battle is sort of an endurance test, seeing which one is going to falter first, which honestly, in hindsight, probably is a perfect theme for this story's boss battle. The way this man, champion Olberic, was glazed throughout the first chapter, and meeting another strong man who is related to his backstory. It's kind of a send-off for his chapter's beginning, which is pretty nice. But on the boss battle alone, it's very monotonous, and there's nothing special that's unique to Olberic alone, except for the theme of the battle, but not the attack patterns themselves. So going to this battle after completing the hype beast that it was chapter 1, this boss battle felt disappointing and almost underwhelming in how there was nothing to be wowed at. And even with Olberic being my favorite champion in Octopath Traveler 1, I have to give this boss battle first chapter a ranking of D. Now we meet Tressa the Merchant, probably my second least favorite character in all of Octopath Traveler 1, including 2. But I won't try to put too much on her plate for this ranking and just gonna focus on her battle alone. And that's even hard to do because out of all the battles I've talked about so far, this has to be the second worst boss battle design ever in Octopath. While the other boss battles had some redeeming qualities, whether that be their aesthetic, their personality, their relation to the characters in the story, or their probably send-off for that character, this one almost has nothing going for it except its recognition as the first chapter boss battle. And the fact that it needed 2 boss battles instead of 1, sort of like to make up space for how boring and dull this boss battle is, says a lot about it. And the way these boss battles are designed doesn't even make them feel like a boss. It just makes them feel like random minions you just fought that just got a growth spurt. And even worse, there's nothing unique about them that relates or connects them to Tressa alone. Because these bosses can be almost a mid-boss or a first boss to every other character. They feel like a copy and paste kind of boss. There is no relation to the character specific to Tressa. But that's just based on their design and aesthetic. But on their battlefront, they do have a peculiar ability that's only unique in this first chapter against Tressa because of her win ability or her AoE that she can target multiple characters. The tactic against them is that both their shields need to be broken at their same time or their special ability will activate, sort of like a tag team battle, which is exactly the way it looks. But that's all they has going for them and is not enough. And for that reason, I have to give them the F tier. You can call me Miss Butters because I'm about to go in, because now we have reached the crux, the peak, the epitome of terrible bosses in first chapter with Ophelia's first boss. This boss is so forgettable in its design that I completely forgot who Ophelia's first boss was, and I had to look through the archives just to jog my memory, because that's how forgettable this boss was. Also in part because Ophelia's story is one of my least liked stories in all of Octopath, if not both 1 and 2. The boss's design has no personality, nothing about it that makes it stand out. The boss's design make it seem like some kind of random monster you would see out in the field, like a field boss. It just has nothing special to it, and nothing special to it for Ophelia in its design aspect. Only thing related to Ophelia is probably its shield break, as Ophelia is a priest and can use luminescence, and can use a staff as a weapon. And though this boss battle can be described as a turtle match, healing and attacking after each and every move, the only thing that makes it bearable is the fact that the priest cast can use a summon and summon people to the boss battle that can either fight for you or support you. There's really nothing else to say much about this boss. It has nothing unique about it, nothing unique for the story except for story's sake itself, and nothing that stands out to make it unique to Ophelia the character. With all these points, I can only give her an F, even without my bias for this being my least like Octopath story.
I'm going to give you a super F!
And now we get to the best of the best. My favorite bosses of all the first chapter bosses in Octopath Traveler, with Primrose, the dancer. This boss immediately stands out to you with his debonair but gawky design, as he sits upon his throne during the battle, but really showcases his arrogance to the character for this story. Really is a great match for Primrose and her story, that you can't find this boss in any other first chapter. You couldn't imagine this boss being any other champion's first boss chapter. except for Primrose, because the way his arrogance is designed seems to be in direct contrast to Primrose's character and her personality, as he has an air of arrogance and nobility, as if flaunting to Primrose his status of being a noble blood. His design feels like it had a lot of thought put into it, much more compared to the other first chapter bosses. As Primrose is a dancer, which is primarily a support class, this battle could have been very difficult for a support character to finish off alone. But luckily Primrose, a dancer class, has the charm ability to be able to summon people to fight for her in battle. So it gives a bit of intrigue into the strategy you need to going into this battle, because not all summons are equal, so you need to find the right summon going into this battle. And then on top of that, having the right shield breaks to get past the minions and the bosses to do your true damage as Primrose. Also your timing, because the summons aren't permanent. After a few turns, they are returned to wherever they came from until they are resummoned again. Even with his gawky design, he still is an effective boss. And just as he's effective, he's also a bully. Just as you healed up most of the damage he's done, he can crit you right back down. So for all these points, I have to give Primrose first chapter boss an S tier. From the design, the character uniqueness, to the champion themselves, the champion's story, and one thing I didn't mention before, but it's the only one that stuck out to me in their chapter, was Primrose boss theme.
I am ready. Stay strong.
And that's my ranking for all the first chapter bosses of Octopath Taveler 1. Some uniqueness, some lame, some very top tier. Whether that be in design, difficulty, or engagement. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, and comment below what you liked about the video. And also comment below what would be your ranking.